What's up, everybody? Dan Tom here with the Protect Your Neck podcast, as well as MMA Junkie USA Today Sports, to talk about something that bridges our world, as well as a world that I like through the lens of film. Of course, it's always great to have our world, if you will, the UFC, kind of, documented and kind of hitting more the mainstream as time has gone on, especially for us longtime fans. So it's an honor and pleasure for me to bring in Mason Gordon, who produced, directed UFC 1 Origins. You may know him. He's got some things I want to talk to him about, perhaps that connect to this. Mason, welcome to the program, man. Thank you for coming.
Sorry, man. The connection was a little janky there, but thanks. It's great to be on the show.
Awesome, yes, sir. And when I was pulling you up before we get into the documentary, I guess what would draw you to this type of project in your background? When I could look up what I could find from your background, you were the creator of Slam Ball. Of course, you work for other production companies and are attached to things like The Last Dance, which I loved. But you yourself kind of created a sport. If not, is there a connection there, or am I just throwing darts at the wall, Mason?
No, there's a huge connection there, and this film was in a lot of ways a full circle moment for me. I was actually, a kid that stole my mom's credit card to watch UFC 1 because I was so drawn to the possibilities of what that event could be. So, I had never ordered anything pay-per-view in my life. I was trying to figure it out with the phone and the credit card and trying to get it ordered. I ended up watching it in a back room, and my mind was completely blown. Over the course of one event, over the course of one night, the entire fighting world got turned on its head, and it would never be the same. And I was so inspired by what I experienced that night in watching this kind of sea change that about 10 years later, 15 years later, I created my own sport that was a mashup of different team sports elements. And that was called Slam Ball. And it's a sport that a lot of people know and a lot of people, think really fondly about. It was also got a global kind of footprint and had some success as well. So to be able to come back and tell the story of that first night in the UFC, given that event had such a profound effect in the trajectory of my life, and to be able to circle back around on that as a filmmaker has really been rewarding for me.
That's awesome, man. I do remember Slam Ball, yes, but what I love about what you produced here, which I didn't realize that, I love the stealing the mom's credit card stories. I feel like even though there's credit card buying, I feel like there is something about the 90s that was special, right? About whether it was a piracy or lack thereof. The piracy was you had to steal your mom's credit card. That was the internet piracy, kids. Now I'm not gonna front, Mason. I didn't watch that exact event live. I was watching, of course, all the blood sports I grew up with. I'm 35, so I was born in 85, so I was already in martial arts and in that world. But it wasn't until maybe the late 90s and perusing those Blockbuster aisles, another reference for the 90s kids out there, that's where it kind of came on my radar. But what I love was, watching the documentary, which, by the way, I'm not just blowing smoke for listeners watching. This was awesome. And again, it's obviously a topic that I'm familiar with, not just with martial arts. I love me some history. And working with MMA Junkie Radio on Sirius XM, I've been lucky enough to interview a lot of the people that have been in the documentary. Obviously, guys like Art Davie, very key individuals. And folks, without giving anything away, I walked away with a lot of new information, which was fantastic. But you also kind of captured that nostalgia of the 90s and even before. So you guys really got a lot of great material handy. Was that hard to acquire from footage, especially the Gracie stuff, like early on, right? I got to imagine that took some negotiating or tracking down.
Yeah, for sure. Anytime you go into a premium kind of documentary space like this and you're trying to tell the definitive story, you're really creating a difficult kind of labyrinth for yourself to navigate. And part of why the UFC origin story really hasn't gotten this premier, feature length treatment before is because it's hard to get all these guys to buy in. It's hard to get people to trust you with their story. Everybody's looking at you a little bit sideways, like, what's your angle here? And, it's like, well, what's my part in it? And the great thing about coming from our company, Mandalay Sports Media, is like we work with the biggest leagues. We work with the biggest stars. We tell stories at a really high level. So when we wanted to bring that to the UFC origin, because we can't believe that people don't know this story. This is one of the greatest sports stories of all time. I mean, think about it. Martial arts, by the numbers, is the second largest sport in the world from a participatory standpoint. It's soccer, and then it's martial arts. And UFC, over the course of a single night, managed to organize that mammoth, gigantic market into something that we all have come to know and love so tremendously and follow with such passion. So, when you set out to do this thing, everybody's kind of looking at you a little bit sideways. And what I was able to do, and why I ended up getting the job, is because I told them, listen, I was so blown away by what happened that night. Like, I went and made my own sport. I lived the holy shit factor, that stretch where every decision you make has like 1,000 domino effects downstream. Every decision, you're like balanced on the edge, and the whole thing's going to fall apart if you get this wrong. And the fact that I had lived through that, and I came to them and I said, listen, a lot of people would come to this film and make it about punching and kicking. And while that's really important to me, the entrepreneurial side of this story was every bit as important. The background of these fighters and the idea that trauma is what brought them into prize fighting in the first place, that's really the great stuff that drew me into this. And I think in hearing my story, guys trusted that they could give me the reins and that I'd try to do something good with it.
I love that too. I feel like there's so many branch offs people could take and run with it, but of course they probably couldn't do it as good at the production level that you guys are running and what I just saw, frankly. But I love that you mentioned with that fighter mentality and the interviews and kind of had that interplay. For documentary styles, it feels like you guys mixed a lot of different styles, but it really worked. Even stuff that kind of hit me from left field, like if it's not too much of a spoiler, there is a bit of an animation aspect, which is kind of may sound surprising considering you guys had such great access to footage, but I legitimately had laughs. I was popping at parts. I hope that was the intention, but it definitely felt like you guys really hit the mark stylistically for what it's worth, which kind of makes sense, right? That's what the documentary is about, mixed martial arts, mixing styles, but I only studied it in college for a little bit. It's not my place to talk, but for what my opinion's worth, I really enjoyed the editing and documentary styles you guys mixed in there as well.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, since one of our other projects, The Last Dance, came out this summer, and had a really great reception. This is actually our next project that's coming out after The Last Dance. So we're really proud of it. We really think we brought our A game to this. I love that the stylistic mixture made sense because we were trying to do that, and then also. The Big Short is probably my favorite film of all time, right? And that's blending drama and comedy and kind of absurdism in a way that hopefully produces a coherent result. So we came to this and we said, wow, there's so many characters and people are coming to this from so many different places. This is the first time the Gracie archives have really been thrown open, and you've really had access to material that you've never really had access to do in order to tell the complete story. And the Gracies are almost like, Brazil is almost like Wakanda to them, and they're almost like this royal family that's shrouded in mystery and they guard their secrets, So the idea that they had the buy-in in this, that our Davey was a part of it, that all the fighters that are still alive were a part of it, that was something that was incredibly gratifying. And we just really can't wait to share it with the world because as big as The Last Dance was for us early this year, we believe in this story so much. And we think that, a lot of people know a little bit about the story. They've seen 5 minutes at the beginning of a 30 for 30 or something like that. But this story is so wild and outlandish it really deserves its own treatment.
Yeah, and again, without giving anything away, I want the audience to go experience it for themselves, of course. But and I'm not some authority, but yes, I've spent a lot of my time. It's now my career, etc., so on and so forth. Was involved in martial arts at the time, and to come away with something that's been covered. And I'll be honest, like I'm like, okay, what am I going to really get here? I've seen so much of this. I've interviewed, and I honestly came away with a lot that I didn't know. And you talked in the beginning, Mason, about kind of that being the problem in a way. You dig yourself a hole when you take this project. And again, without giving it anything too much away, but you mentioned about the Gracie archives. I do love that you guys gave that approach, because not only is it an amazing sport and people should know about the story, I sign off on everything you said, but the beginning, I dare say, without giving away too much, I feel like you guys are really going to have a lot of the jiu-jitsu crowd thumping hard for you guys, because you guys did a really justice for jiu-jitsu. It's really I'm already sold on jiu-jitsu. I love it, and I'm like, oh, I want to go do jiu-jitsu now. This is making me love jiu-jitsu more. But just really quick on that with the Gracies and the beginning, without giving too much away, but like I feel like I knew the Maeda story, which is a different story you guys don't really touch on, and it's not relevant, so I don't blame you for it. And then obviously we get to the UFC when they start mixing with Art Davie and getting things running. I was not familiar with the Horian story as you guys delve into it, and to reference an 80s movie I grew up on, Coming to America. It really felt like the Brazilian real life version of Coming to America, again in keeping with the theme of this whole thing feeling like a movie in the first place.
Well, how important is it, like especially in the day and age that we're in right now, that we reaffirm the value of immigrant stories, right? Here was someone that, the story about the American immigrant story is about people that have no resources, that are just chasing like this better life. Well, here's somebody whose life was actually better in Brazil. And he was so driven and so determined to come to the States and spread his family's art around the world. That's something that I really was blown away by, his commitment, the hardships that he endured along the way, and then also just the ability to stick with it. Like there's a point in this film that I don't think people know, where he endured years and years and years, and I'm not talking about a couple years. I'm talking about a decade or more of complete being completely off the radar. Nobody knows what you're doing, toiling away in a garage of all things, and just having no compromise to his vision for where he wanted to take it. And you mentioned jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu really, in a lot of ways, became a glue that happened that night, that formed the basis of how these other martial arts could interact. And I thought that was really an interesting thing. And also the notion that I think audiences will find that the UFC as it was originally conceived is so different from what it is today. And to be able to go back and A/B that thing now, it was way more like Kumite or something like that than what you have today, which is much more of a blend of all these styles. But to be able to see what it was originally conceived at, before all this evolution, I thought was really tremendous. And going back into that archival, I was excited. I was like, wow, it's like every fight, it's like I'm seeing shades of Conor and Izzy and all these, and Khabib and all these amazing fighters that we know and love today. But you see them in their prototype forms, like in that first night.
Yeah, that's always the fun part of history, right? When you have these parallels you can jump to. For me, my main gig is analyzing these fights and breaking it down. And any time being a history buff, anytime I can, have a nod to, the first time we saw this type of matchup, it goes back to here. And you guys have some great montages that are really well done. I'll just leave it at that as far as counting in and counting out of those eras. But and I guess one of the last notes on the Gracies I wanted to ask about, because I interviewed Bao Wen as far as the Bruce Lee documentary that just came out. And again, you're dealing with an important martial arts family, that deserves respect and reverence, obviously, and you did a good job of respecting everybody. I don't feel like you guys crossed any lines. I don't think people are going to be knocking on your door going, hey, I don't like this final cut. But however, when you do deal with these families, uh, sometimes they're reserved, as far as releasing this kind of footage. So that's why I guess I made that note in the beginning that was very interesting, because you don't see this stuff floating around loosey goosey for a reason. Especially early on, you're seeing the estates and kind of really that money that you heard about that the Gracie family came from, which is also why it makes the Horian story so rewarding and interesting. The fact that he chose that, kind of going away from the money and being the prince, if you will, with the coming to America thing that I inserted. But I really love that story, and you guys did a great job of showing that spectrum.
Yeah, interestingly enough, there, like I said, people have tried to address the origin story of the UFC before, in part, right? It's like the 25-year retrospective of the UFC. There's 5 minutes at the beginning. There was something they did at the beginning of 30 for 30 with, Chuck and Tito, where they did 5 or 6 minutes on what the beginning of the UFC was like. But the nuances of what happened that night and how all this stuff came together, and what we saw when we were researching the doc, is that there were these kind of far-flung interviews that we saw that people were interested, and we saw that all these people wanted to talk about this, but nobody could quite get everybody together and everybody on board. So that was our mission from the beginning. It's trying to create a structure where everyone felt comfortable telling the whole story. And then from there, we just tried to do, what we do, and try to bring those elements together in the most entertaining and informative way possible. And I'm so glad that, even someone as well versed in the lore and all these things as yourself comes away from this knowing a lot of things that they didn't know coming in. I mean, 8 out of 10 people think that, the Fertituses or Dana White created the UFC. I mean, That's legit. That's today.
Yes.
So the idea of being able to shine a light on that, and then also just revalidate how wonderful and how special the UFC we have today is, because these entrepreneurs and fighters and broadcasters were so in over their head that night. They were so against the ropes, and they didn't know it. They didn't care. They had blinders on, and they were like, no matter what, we're going to get through this, and it's all going to work out. And who'd have thunk it, but it kind of did.
Yeah, and the nuance is a great word, and with the broadcast, like the burp, I'll leave it at that. But there are things that hardcores only know and would think that you guys would leave out. And not only do you guys include it, but you expand upon it, end up teaching the hardcores like myself something about it in return. And lastly, kind of retouching on that note, a question I wanted to ask you. Yeah, I could totally see the challenge, like you said, the main challenge as far as bringing everybody together to tackle it in the first place, right? Forget about the styles you chose, which were great, but bringing everybody together. And I was going to ask you, when I would interview these people, I also feel like, especially the higher you go, as far as more important to the story, if you will, everybody has their own spin, I notice. They love to tell their own side of the story. So I was wondering that, I guess, trying to get everybody together, everybody has their own spin. And you did your own research beforehand. Was there any answers that surprised you that maybe you thought, okay, he's going to give this answer for the umpteenth time, but you got a different answer? Was there anything like that?
Yeah, there were a lot of kind of factional elements and conflicting stories. And you have that. Anytime there's something that's this successful, you have a lot of people that are like, well, this is how it is in my brain. And it doesn't really match up with what other people are saying and what other people think. And what's fascinating about that to me is that they really think that way. Everybody's got memory is fungible, right? It's all got this kind of slant to it where they're either a bigger part of it or they're the hero or what have you. And what we tried to do in telling the story is give everyone their say and try to validate their point of view to the extent that they're willing to communicate it, and give the audience a chance to really make the final decision. And in some of these things, we unearthed some pretty amazing stories of things that have happened behind the scenes that people have touched on and stuff. But then when you have access to, Art Davies stuff and the Gracie archives and all this kind of thing, you're like, wow, there are photos from in that room. So how do we tell that story, and what's his perspective and what's his perspective, and how do you fit all these things together? So it's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, but it's ultimately being able to access all these documents and things that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to involve in a documentary like this, I think was really compelling on a lot of fronts.
Absolutely, and I love the edits in there as far as like the sail and stuff, and you guys really did a good job of getting it in there, because even with the focus that you guys have given it and the respect you guys gave it, it's still hard to fit perhaps everything you want. You guys did such a good job of bringing us back to the early 90s and giving us insight into these characters and their growth since then. It sparks all these other ideas, and you guys do a good where are they now tie up. But before we talk any further, I feel like I'm going to keep giving it away, so I really want to stress people to watch it. Now, I don't believe I gave you the opportunity at the top, but as far as pay-per-view viewing location or anything you want to plug as far as this coming up, because I can already guarantee you people are going to want to know where they can find this, when it drops, etc. Can you give us any kind of information as of right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So UFC 1 Origins is the next project from Mandalay Sports Media. We did The Last Dance this summer, which the Michael Jordan series did really well. But we're excited to kind of bring that storytelling to the UFC and the UFC Origin. And then our distributor is actually Gunpowder and Sky, who distributed Hoop Dreams and Cinna, which are two of the greatest sports docs that have ever existed. So they were really my dream date to distribute the film. The film's going to drop on October 16th. It'll be available everywhere you can get a new film from the studios. So iTunes, Fandango, Vudu, all of those services. It'll be available on VOD. And then on October 14th, 2 days before it drops, we're going to have a pay-per-view live stream premiere of the film that will include a fighters Q&A with some of your favorite fighters from the first UFC. That will be hosted by Ariel Helwani, and then a entrepreneurship Q&A hosted by Damon John of Shark Tank. So that'll be Horian Gracie and Art Davie and myself. So that should be a really good time. It's a one-of-a-kind event. Nobody's ever really put this kind of together in one event before. So you can go to UFC1doc.com. You can see the trailer. You can get your tickets there. And we're excited for people to see this. We put a lot of love and blood and sweat into this, not unlike what the fighters and promoters did in 1993.
Yeah, again, folks, I'm not blowing smoke when I can say I co-sign on this. This is definitely worth the watch. Track it down, whether you want to do the pay-per-view party there or otherwise. Make sure you follow those instructions. And I wouldn't be doing my job, even though I'm more of an analyst than a journalist. But to be honest, you guys just got me interested. I was a big Chicago Bulls fan growing up, Scottie Pippen fan more specifically. Loved The Last Dance. And you guys saw the success of it. The whole world did. As far as Mandalay Bay Sports Media Group, I don't want to get you in trouble or to reveal any plans, but are we going to be seeing more of these in general? Maybe not another MMA one straight off, but maybe hockey or any other sports? Anything coming down the pipe that you can hint or share?
Yeah, we've actually been really kind of overwhelmed by the response to The Last Dance, and part of that has really kind of created an opportunity to canonize that format, this kind of macro series format. So we have some big names that we're going to be announcing shortly that we're through business affairs on, and we should be able to make some announcements of similar projects that should be coming to you in the months and years ahead.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it, and if you want to talk about those, this has been great. I'd be more than happy to talk about the other projects as they come out. Fantastic job again, Mason. Anything else you want to say on the way out? The floor is yours, but thank you for your time today.
This was amazing. Thank you. And, I think that hardcore UFC fans are really going to be satisfied and come away with a lot of additional knowledge that they may not have had. But then this is also kind of a bigger story. I don't think, you have to be completely inured in the world of MMA in order to appreciate this story, because, we're all, at the end of the day, we've all got this dream inside ourselves that we want to get out, that we want to see, like, get into the world and grow into this kind of like, seismic change. And for a bunch of guys that were, completely overextended in 1993 to take this shot, to take this opportunity to throw their whole, body, self, and soul up against the wall and see if it's stuck. I think it's nice to circle back around and kind of validate their stories and try to give it the premium documentary treatment.
Perfectly said. Thanks again, folks. I'm going to let the man end it with those notes before I ruin it any further. Thanks for tuning in to the Protect Your Neck podcast.